We're joined now by Harrison Pittman, the director of the National Agricultural Law Center at the University of Arkansas. Thank you, sir. Appreciate the time.
Hey, I appreciate you.
All right, we got this dynamic going on across our country where, particularly among some politicians, they are concerned and looking at foreign ownership, trying to ban it in some cases, some of these states, particularly when it comes to China. What
hmm
is going on right now?
So, um, what we see going on right now is it's a historically significant shift in this area. And from a big picture perspective, beginning in around 2021 and then obviously into 2022, we started seeing an uptick, particularly at the state level, on interest about foreign ownership. And that was really the first time in not that what I'm overgeneralizing, but certainly at that level, this was the first time in some decades that had really been an issue that captured the imagination of a lot in the political realm. What we've seen in 2023 was basically it was 2021 and 2022 times three or four. Like it was just huge. And in those first 2 years, these bills, or as proposed, what they would do is focus on foreign ownership sort of at large. So really no distinction between, say, Canada and the Netherlands and Germany and China. It was just sort of any kind of foreign ownership is what we want to restrict. And what we saw occur around the country is, for the most part, those bills died. They died in committee. They didn't make it out. And a lot of support that they started with peeled off. And there's different reasons for that. But some of the numbers that help explain that, of all your foreign ownership in the United States, half of it's in the forestry industry. And 66% or more of foreign ownership comes from Canada, the Netherlands, Italy, Germany, and I'm leaving somebody out there. And but
But
you're
that's not what
looking
we
at
talk about, though.
no, and if you look at the big picture, you can say these numbers one of two ways. 3.1%, it's right in there, is what's reported is in form of privately held agricultural land is in foreign ownership. Okay. And ownership can be actual ownership of the property, fee title ownership, but it can also be long-term leases. And long-term leases are 10 years or more. So wind energy, solar, you think of leases like that. So you could have land that would be owned by an American citizen, and maybe they inherited it within their family in years past. They still own it, but it could be in that foreign ownership data. If, say, they've entered in like a lease for development rights for wind turbines or solar panels and things like that. So 97-ish% of private agricultural land in the United States is not in foreign ownership. Since we started collecting data in 1978, that's when the Federal Reporting Act was, the Agricultural Foreign Investment Disclosure Act was enacted. It's basically broken down. Pretty much half of all foreign ownership is in forestry. The other is split roughly by 25% between cropland and pasture land. And the level of Chinese ownership, there is as reported, there is Chinese ownership. It's less than 1% of all foreign ownership of ag land. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I think the total acreage is under 400,000. A lot of that traces back to the Smithfield transaction back around 2011, 2012, 2013. And Smithfield owned a lot of farmland, and it became part of that transaction. And so there was an uptick at that time of this issue of foreign ownership, but that really landed in Missouri and North Carolina. But Missouri actually had a pretty strict law and still does, but they amended it to allow and kind of facilitate that transaction. But what we saw in 2021 was definitely an uptick. And coming out of those 2 years, only two states that proposed a law actually enacted a law. One was Arkansas and the other was Indiana. Arkansas actually, at that time anyway, enacted a law that arguably made foreign ownership even easier than it was before, which was a 180 from where that proposal started. And then Indiana passed a law that it did apply to foreign ownership at large, but I think by the time someone really looks at the exceptions and the way that's written, you can see that complexity of the political process factored into it. Now, 2023, we've seen, we're now 36 plus states that had at least one proposal in 2023. Many states had multiple proposals. They tended to focus on the big four, some combination of China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia. And they have had legislatively more success, because, now it's tailored towards a handful of countries that, frankly, Iran, North Korea, and Russia. I don't think there's a big push from investors in those countries at the moment.
Right.
But the Chinese part, and we have seen, particularly in Arkansas, where I'm at, that's the first state to have, in the wake of passing these new laws, and they're not all the same, by the way, actually see enforcement actions.
Yeah, where your governor has instructed this Chinese company to divest itself.
Yeah, it's Syngenta, which was purchased in recent years by Kim China, but it's based in Switzerland. So there is this Chinese component to it. It was approved, went through an approval process with the, U.S. government.
Right.
But they owned about, I don't have the exact numbers, but it's in the ballpark of 75 to 125 acres of research plot that they'd owned since the 80s. And that's what they're divesting. And I don't know the details, but I did see just before the weekend, the Secretary of Agriculture, Wes Ward, had requested that the Attorney General look into two other entities. And I don't know that they were actually ag specific, but for potential of violating the Arkansas law.
So how strong does this feel? Does it feel like a temporary flashpoint where it's getting all this attention and then it'll fade as, the country's attention and politicians' attention moves on to something else? Or does this feel more lasting where there are leaders who feel like, particularly when it comes to China, it's a big enough threat that there needs to be this big push to get any Chinese company out of this? How strong does this feel?
I think it feels pretty strong. So I think that we'll still see activity in 2023 or 2024. Whew, gotten so used to saying 2023. We're almost to the new year. And at the federal and state level. So one piece of this to keep in mind is that, for those who are in the ag circles and stay in that world, we just recently extended the 2018 Farm Bill for another year, but the House and Senate are still trying to get to an agreement in the first quarter, hopefully, of 2024, for those who are wanting to see a brand new farm bill, multi-year farm bill. I mention that because that's a legislative vehicle for any type of federal action dealing with foreign ownership. And so that still is pinned up, and there's numerous proposals from on the House and Senate side, and some much more encompassing than others. So we still don't know how that's going to play out on the federal level. There's still, under the Defense Production Act, there's a committee that the acronym would be CFIUS or CFIUS, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, that gets a lot of attention in this area. Their role is to review some, transactions that involve foreign companies, and so ag being a part of this political debate, I think that could still get a lot of attention. I think that this could last a little longer, and I wonder if eventually we don't enter into a phase at some point where the conversation is different, meaning a lot of the conversation, at least as it comes up, is about theft, data, stealing technology, which has happened. And that doesn't necessarily relate to ownership of land per se. I wonder if some point do we have a conversation that's about, should we increase criminal penalties for theft of data, regardless of who's doing it. I have wondered if at some point in some future year, is there an effort to challenge some of this under international trading rules, litigation before the World Trade Organization? And so that remains to be seen. And that would take a lot more sort of discussion, more consensus building in our political system of people between the legislative branch and the executive branch, looking at the problem and studying it, and looking at, is there a long-term way that we can add to all these other efforts that could also have an impact here to achieve what we want. So I would say it's going to last. I don't know. It may kind of, like some of these states, they've passed laws. There may not be an appetite to come back and amend, and they may feel like they put a lot of effort in and there's no sense in going back. I will say something that I've seen firsthand from quote unquote the beginning. This is an issue where it is difficult to get political consensus on. As much as there's intensity and there's passion behind it, and in fact, I'd say a lot of your effort of like where it focuses on the big four, which includes China, it's a result of the challenge in getting a consensus around this issue. Because you have a lot, like when these issues come up, give you an example. The state of Alabama is one of the highest percentages of foreign ownership of private ag land in the United States. If you were to remove forestry from their equation, I think you're probably left with somewhere between 20 and 30,000 acres of private agricultural land that's in foreign ownership. And so you have a constituency there that it's like, hang on, we have a lot of relationships here with Canadian investors and from the Netherlands. And we don't want to frustrate those like that. That's a publicly stated mindset that's been out there. And so I think it's been harder than people might realize. And if someone looks at South Dakota, Governor Nome had, and what she wanted, it was changed considerably in the legislature, and it was ag interests that largely were split out. And I have found that to be true across the country. There's no issue that in ag that pulls in every political interest, every group in some way, from ag lenders to your farm bureaus, which of course includes all down to your county committees and your individual membership. They have difficulty finding consensus. Cattlemen's groups, and I could go on down the list, forestry, they have their own concerns that come to the table, and there are places for an agreement too, but it's harder than you might think. And even as we were coming into 2023 and these bills were coming up, I knew from, without divulging names and places and so forth, I knew that there were discussions of sort of guardrails on what the governor and the leadership in that particular legislature were going to work on. But once those I call them weather balloons, but the Chinese balloons came over.
Balloons. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the spy balloons. Weather balloon was the wrong word. The spy balloons, all bets were off. Everybody got out of the way, and it was just it was just like opening an oven up that was 700 degrees, and the heat just came pouring out. People just got out of the kitchen on it. So I think it's still going to last for a while, and we still have yet 14 states in 2023 that did not have a proposal. I think they could come back and do something. And some states made proposals that didn't enact something. I know for sure they're coming back. Like I know already there's a handful that they're going to have proposals. So I don't think it's going away. I'd add one other component to it, and that's litigation. We don't know that outcome yet. In the state of Florida, that's the first litigation that's been filed challenging any of these statutes. And I think that as time goes on, there could be other legal actions brought that are oftentimes they have constitutional arguments, like So, and I don't know that those will come out of the ag industry. I think they could be, if I'm predicting, I'd say it could be more energy sector. And so you have a lot of investment that's like solar and wind, um, and they may not be Chinese. It could be other foreign entities, but I think that that's an area that you could see some legal actions brought, maybe not next year or the year after, but in some future years. So this one could be a slower burn than what we'd seen before.
So much to watch with this. Hey, we really appreciate your time and look forward to hearing you in person in Des Moines in January.
Yeah, and Michael Brown, my colleague, will be there, and he's very knowledgeable. In fact, all the resources that we've done, those are really coming from Micah. And I think that anybody that's wanting to learn more, I think this will be a very informative panel. And of course, we're a research and information center, and we interact with people all the time. People are free to email us or call us. And I know for sure in the last 2 years, we have absolutely spent hundreds of hours on Zoom calls and phone calls and presentations and everything, and interacting with people who are all over the spectrum on this. And that's a huge value that the National Agricultural Law Center brings. Is we're a non-advocacy, non-partisan educational resource. And so we don't, as they say, have a dog in the hunt. We just we're there to be informative and to help in that way. So I would recommend anybody who's interested in this issue to come on in at the Land Expo, jump in. The water will be fine, and we'll have a good time.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate you.
Right. Yeah.